Good afternoon, folks. Regardless of when you're watching this, basically I hope you're having a good day. I hope that your Labor Day weekend is very eventful but not too crowded, if you get my meaning, as we are in the age of COVID. Now, just to start off, I want to make sure you understand that I am well aware that this is backwards. I understand that because I'm on a camera at this point that you're not going to be able to see this, but I'm using some of the visuals that you supplied to me through your assignment to prove a point. I'm going to share this Google slide with you on Google Classroom when I post this video so that you can split screen it, you can have one running in the background, however you want to do it. But I am going to supply this to you if you need the actual writing. So I'll have this projected behind me to help me to guide you through the video here. But again, I'm well aware that you would not be able to read this without some problem, if you will. So I get that. If you have any issues, if you still have questions, if you're really kind of struggling with all this, you can certainly email me and I'll send you whatever resources that you need. All right, so your assignment, your first assignment for APUS history was different. It was asking you to draw something, and many of you actually expressed that you didn't like it. You didn't particularly care for it. Okay, I even had some students say that they felt icky, they felt wrong, they felt like they were just kind of bringing up stereotypes and bad ones at that. My point with that was to get to that, where you realize that unfortunately, you don't know much about Native societies and it's not your fault. Through our educational system, through our media, whether it be movies, TV, whatever that case may be, we have not done a very good job of even relaying what we do know. And that is a problem when you're talking about Native societies, especially if you're talking about pre-Columbian, prior to Columbus. Okay, that's what that means. There are some issues. So of course, when we're talking about Native societies, why do we know so little? Okay, well, looking at some of your drawings, and I'm not going to put any names to these, you don't need to lay claim to them by any stretch. You may not be able to see them obviously on the video all that well, but I'll share the document with you here. Many of you were giving me pictures that you've drawn with natives with bows and arrows. They're wearing moccasins. They're wearing kind of a beaded belt, if you will. They're not wearing any clothes up top. They've got feathers and braided hair. You can see this person has put teepees in the back. Okay, or you have more cartoonish looking. Almost like they would fit into a Bugs Bunny cartoon. You've got the feathers in that hair, the tomahawk. The very muscular frame and loincloth, if you will. You've got this person also given the feathers and the braided hair. And very well done, mind you, when it comes to drawing, but again, this would not be something that a native would look at and say, hey, that's exactly what my ancestors look like. Of course, you had pictures like the one to the far left there with the big headdress, and of course, the kind of beaded dress, if you will. You have this person who's saying, hey, bow and arrow, axe, spear, I assume spear at that point. They've got their teepee here, they've got all this, the braided hair, the feathers, if you will, okay? And then of course you have, feathers, dark hair in braids, tomahawk, breechcloth, spears, moccasins, bow and arrow, living in a wigwam. And this one, of course, very similar to that one. The big headdress, the teepee, if you will, the campfire in the background with the spear, see, you got me saying that now, spear and the tomahawk as well. So these are the kind of caricatures, basically, that you were coming up with. And it's not your fault that you think this way, because this is kind of how you've been conditioned, all right? But the question is these are just some of the drawings, keep in mind. There were others, and certainly stick figure drawings in lesser degree. Many of you have artistic skills, and you were still depicting them as almost a caricature because you don't know the reality. And again, that's not your fault. As I was saying to some of the students in person here just the other day, imagine if I gave this assignment for any other racial group, any other demographic. If I was to say, draw me an average white woman, draw me an average African American male, draw me an average Jewish man, draw me an average Latino woman. if you did that, how quickly would you lean on what we call stereotypes, which are many times they'll very simplistically say, oh, it's a half truth, when in reality it's a generalization and quite honestly a caricature. And of course the words that you came up with mirrored that as well. Okay, and of course another one, you have one where this person honestly was trying to be a little bit more academic, a little bit more worldly, if you will, in their drawing. They were trying to be a little bit more traditional, okay? And this person, of course, went with the cartoon version, the kind of, very cute little drawing, but certainly not something, but again, in class, in-person class, somebody was raising the question of mascots. And couldn't you see this being used by one of those football, baseball teams, whatever, as a mascot? And this is why the issue has been brought up so recently, is that they're not cartoons, they're people, and no matter how you draw them, you're being general, okay? And of course, when we went to the words that you came up with, and again, I realize these are backwards, but they were coming up with moccasins, feathers in the hair, hunted buffalo, grass houses, wigwam, bows and arrows, face paint, polytheistic, which means multiple gods, tomahawk, scalping, savage, teepee living, nomadic, hunter and gatherer, warriors, territorial, animal skin clothes, bare-chested. Well, some of these, are pretty common sense. Animal skin clothes, well, what else were they going to make it out of? Some of these tribes would have definitely had animal skins clothes, especially if they were hunting buffalo. But what if you lived in a region of the United States, what is the United States nowadays? What if you lived in a region that there are no buffalo? So naturally, by kind of pigeonholing them as, they hunted buffalo, there were tribes that had no idea what a buffalo was because they didn't live in an area where the buffalo roamed. Okay, bare-chested, you wouldn't be bare-chested living up in Maine, what is today Maine, in December. There's no way they would have done that. Wearing face paint, what if you had nothing to actually make paint with? Bow and arrows. Unless you're hunting something that requires that type of skill, you're not going to have a bow and arrow. Okay, polytheistic, not all the native societies were polytheistic. Some of them were monotheistic, like the Christian faith. Okay, tomahawks. Tomahawks, a lot of scholars now believe that the tomahawk, at least in its modern incantation and used for scalping, as it's up there, tomahawks were actually used for scalping by Europeans many times before any native tribes learned how to do that as well. And that was basically used for literally putting a bounty on somebody's head. This idea that, if you killed somebody, you pulled their hair back, you scalped to prove that you had killed that person. And they would trade that for money from the Europeans. Okay, so again, these are all typical things that will come out. Many of them are stereotypes that are detrimental, but let's be honest, sometimes even things that you would think are good things are also detrimental as well, because if you categorize somebody as hardworking, knowledgeable on nature, proud, many people would say that's a good thing. But are all the people within that society knowledgeable about nature? No, you have there are going to be some idiots within the native community that aren't going to understand how nature works either. You're going to have different levels of intelligence. You're going to have different levels of work. Not all natives are going to be clever. Not all are going to be, traditional or tribal or whatever else. So when you come up with some of these terms, some of these are not accurate for the group, okay? Even if you would consider them to be a positive, okay? Now, of course, somebody also wrote down names. I had Sacagawea, I had Pocahontas, I had Geronimo, Sitting Bull. People knew names of Native Americans, okay? And those are kind of our examples, but pre-Columbian, prior to Columbus, there's no written record. We don't know who these people were. And that's partially the problem why you get these words and phrases, okay? So why are these stereotypes harmful? Why are they harmful? Because they inform our decisions about an entire group of people without the full knowledge of the subject matter. And because of that, it works towards dehumanization. Anytime you use a stereotype, you are dehumanizing an entire group of people, okay? You are not giving them what makes you human. The characteristics about you humanize you to everybody else, okay? the more people know about you, the more people care about you. Well, if you don't know the specifics of a group, you stop to care. You don't really have the affinity for those people. And because of that, you start seeing the dichotomy in how whites were treated and how natives were treated, how Africans were treated, how Latinos were treated. And this can have a very detrimental effect when you're talking about governmental policies, when you're talking about economic policies, and certainly as you're talking about societal values and acceptance. So the stereotypes out there are very harmful regardless of how you go, okay? And as I've kind of said before, you know, can stereotypes be accurate towards individuals? Sure. As a white male, one of the stereotypes that I would definitely face are white men can't jump and white men can't dance. Well, in those two instances, they are absolutely right for this guy. But they certainly would not be applicable to others. That it certainly would not be accurate to say that Dirk Nowitzki can't jump as a basketball player and dunk a basketball. It would be, it would be wrong if somebody said that Justin Bieber couldn't dance. Okay, I'm not a fan of Justin Bieber, but I'll give him credit. He can move. You know, so again, stereotypes can be proven wrong by individuals all the time. And it's very detrimental to kind of base your judgment, and especially your judgment of the history and the culture of people based around the stereotypes, okay? And we've got to be careful of that. Now, of course, how did we get to that point? Why do we know so little? Well, it starts with the land bridge theory. The land bridge theory is the idea that how did these people, these different people, come into the United States? How did they funnel down into the Americas, whether it be North or South America? How did they get here? Well, according to the land bridge theory, up in the Bering Strait, in between what is today Alaska and Russia, that whether it be because of cold weather hardening and creating an ice bridge, or whether it be because of the ice bridge forming and the ice age happening, that the ocean receded and there was an actual strip of land exposed, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years ago. When that occurred, according to this theory, Asian nomadic peoples went across that land bridge in search of animals, in search of new territory, whatever the case may be, and they slowly filtered down through the Americas over time. Now, some stayed up in what is today Canada and Alaska. That's where you get the Eskimos, Inuits, the people who are the tribal associations up there. And then you also have some people that filtered down into what is today America, the United States of America. I got to be careful on my terminology there. But they filter down into places that are known as the Great Basin, the Great Plains, what are known as Eastern Woodlands, and the Southeast, okay? And they filter down and form tribal associations. Now, we do not know much about these organizations and these tribal affiliations prior to first contact. The reason, again, is because there was no written record, and anything that possibly could have survived through word of mouth was killed off either by disease, old age, or just the inability to stay within your cultural grouping. Because one of the first things to die, quite literally, in any society is your common history. If you're forced out of where your resources are, you lose your records, you lose your mindset of kind of who you are. Just think of it this way: if all of a sudden we had a cataclysmic earthquake, or meteor hits the earth and causes a mass extinction event, the first thought is not going to be, oh my God, save the library. Oh my God, save the historical records. What is going to be the first thing is, oh my God, how are we going to eat? How are we going to provide for ourselves? How are we going to survive? So the first thing that's really going to go away is any sort of record of how you did things, who you are as a people, and because of that, we know very little of what these people were all about prior to Columbus coming over, and by extension, the Spanish, the English, the Portuguese, whoever. You also have the spreading out of societies. Their spread throughout what is today the United States is also based around the same thing that we spread as a culture now. We do not settle in places that are out in the middle of nowhere. We settle around lakes, we settle around rivers, we settle around the coasts. Think about where the major metropolitan areas are. If you're going to talk about the biggest cities in what is today the United States, you're talking about New York City, you're talking about LA, you're talking about Miami, San Francisco, Seattle. They're on the coasts. Now, you may get a Chicago, but Chicago's on Lake Michigan. Okay, you may get Dallas, Houston. Houston's on the Gulf of Mexico. Dallas is more inland, but they have rivers. These places that are highly concentrated with people are going to be on routes, if you will, waterways that allow for them to travel and to live. And let's be honest, if you're on a waterway, you're probably also able to grow crops. You're probably also that's where the animals are going to be, so you're going to be able to survive off of those food sources. So the natives are going to be no different. They're going to settle around the rivers and the lakes and the coastal areas. When you look at this map here, you're going to notice that there are big swaths of territory that don't have native tribes associated with it. Well, those same areas are places like Wyoming. Nothing against Wyoming. Wyoming, I'm sure, is a nice state. I personally haven't been there, but it's not exactly the most populous state in the United States. Well, it would not have been the most populous area back then. It was a wasteland that was not cultivated. They couldn't utilize it, so they probably didn't have large amounts of natives roaming around that territory. Natives are no different than any other human when it comes to survival skills. You go where the food is. You go where the waterways are. You go where you can survive, okay? And of course, all of these native tribes would have had differing backgrounds when it came to what they wore. They would have had differing backgrounds what they ate. They certainly were a diverse group of people, the same way the United States is. We have different dialects because if you're in New York, you're probably talking like this, but they're not talking that way out in LA. They're not talking that way down in New Orleans. They're certainly not talking that way up in Minnesota. There are certain ways that they talk based around where they live. And at that point, I'm not really talking about different languages as much as I am accents. But these people had different tribal affiliations, and even though they may share common vocabulary from time to time, they still had different dialects and had harder times getting along, if you will, especially as the Europeans settle the coast and start pushing them in. We'll get to that eventually, but again, this spreading out of societies is going to be detrimental to them later on when the Europeans show up and start to compact them in. You also had the tribal nature, where they form their own societies, they form their own languages, they form their own histories. Just like Europe, if you will, you get French people and Spanish people together and they have a common border, there's going to be some push back and forth. And if you remember from your world studies, there were wars constantly over in Europe during the Middle Ages, during that time period in the 1200s, 1300s, trying to establish themselves as nations, if you will. And some of them were a little late to the party over there as well, but it led to constant warfare. And of course, intertribal warfare, no different than in Europe, when you have literally conflicts like the 100 Years' War, where England and France go back and forth for 100 years, including other nations, whether it be Austria or the Germanic states or whoever else, in their conflict throughout that 100-year time span. You're talking about entire generations that fought the war, died off, and then started it over again with their children and grandchildren. So obviously European struggle is no different than what happened over here as well. And of course the impact of first contact, the first Europeans to step foot. There's going to be a huge impact where, because of disease, and the land bridge theory goes into that. The land bridge theory, especially if we're talking about an ice age, we're talking about people coming across the land bridge, literally having bacteria and other things on their clothing that dies off. And because that all dies off, or the people that had that bacterial infection die off, they almost kind of go through a kind of like a Lysol shower, if you will, because they come through, and the people that make it through don't have the bacteria in their system anymore, and those that did had already died off. Through time, these people had not gotten any sort of a resistance or immune reaction to things that Europeans were coming into contact all the time. The Europeans had come into contact with plague. The Europeans had come into contact with smallpox and other things. The natives had not. So these native societies are going to be impacted because their immune systems are not trained, they were not introduced to these things. So first contact is going to be absolutely decimating to the Native American populations because of those failure to have those immunities. Okay, all of that comes into first contact. Now, of course, if those people are dying off, so too is their common history, so too is their common culture, their language. It just, unfortunately, is a sad kind of procession, if you will, of issues that occur. Okay, now the Europeans are going to decide to finally explore. Now there are reasons for it, and again, this will be on. I'll post this so you can see it right side, the right way, if you will. But there are reasons for European navigation. The Europeans had finally kind of figured out that they needed to use the ocean as a methodology of trade and of warfare. They realized that through countless years of fighting over territory. They had fought the Crusades over in the Middle East, and they had utilized their religious backing to go and try and storm the Holy Land. When that really didn't work out and they were kind of left without the need to go over to the Holy Land, they started realizing that in order to expand and get more resources, they would either have to go and take over territory in other nations in Europe, which they had already done time and time again. If you know your European history at all, you know the northern part of France is some of the most fought over territory in the entire world, mostly between England and France. And if you go to places like Normandy and Brittany nowadays, English is not only a second language, it's really a second dialect in northern France because it had been fought over for thousands of years, quite honestly. They were getting tired of doing that. They were getting tired of fighting over the same real estate, so they kind of realized they could venture out. And through the stories of a guy named Marco Polo, Marco Polo is kind of an interesting character in world history. We're not sure if he actually ever went over to China. He might have just been a very good storyteller, somebody that overheard stories from other people while he was in the Middle East, heard the tales of explorers and people that had gone over to China to trade. And since the Middle East was kind of the crossroads of a trade at that point, he had picked up all these stories. He wrote about them and he toured Europe talking about, oh, well, when I was over in the Chinese court and when I was meeting with the leader of, this tribe or that tribe over in Asia, and it captivated people. But the main thing that really captivated him was he was bringing back spices, he was bringing back silk, he was bringing back things that, again, he could have gotten at a corner market in the Middle East to bring back with him, but he enticed the Europeans to want to go and travel. By doing so, and because he was fueled by Renaissance, the Renaissance thinkers, and the mindset of the time, kind of more of an adventurous spirit, if you will, and the fact that there was relative peace in the continent, the Pope had managed to kind of smooth over a lot of the older issues between countries, and countries like Portugal and Spain and England and France were going to eventually start to kind of see the need to expand their reaches. As that is occurring, you start to see a general progression towards exploration. Portugal is going to be the first one. They had a prince by the name of Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry decides that he would like to kind of explore the world. He is kind of the father of modern navigation. He's also kind of the father of modern slavery, if you will, because of that, it kind of goes hand in hand, because Portugal goes and explores Africa first. They explore the western side of Africa, and because of that, Portugal really starts to participate in what becomes the international slave trade first. So they lead the way in navigation and unfortunately slave trade as well. And that exploration of Africa and finding a water route that could avoid the middlemen of the Middle East. That's literally what they were talking about, is if I wanted to trade European goods with Chinese goods, I would have to go through what is today the Middle East. I would have to go through, Jerusalem, or I'd have to go through Baghdad, or I'd have to go through one of the cities in the Middle East. There were people there that were buying things from Europe and then selling them to the Far East at a marked up price. Same thing with Chinese goods coming back through the Middle East, selling them to Europe. These middlemen were making a profit. Well, the Europeans wanted to skip that. Portugal is trying to find a way to go by going around Africa by sea. All right, and they had explorers out doing that. Now, as Portugal starts to see that it is possible, they finally get around the southern tip of Africa, they start going through the Indian Ocean, they realize that that's a possibility. As they start seeing success, it kind of spurs on other countries like Spain. Spain was a little late to the party because they were trying to get rid of the Muslims, better known as the Moors, out of Spain at the time. Once they managed to expel the Moors, Ferdinand, this guy right here, and Isabella, who were the leaders of Aragon and Castile, they get married, they unite, they expel the Moors, the Spanish become a powerhouse, and they start putting money into exploration. And of course, the major explorers that were out there were people like Ferdinand Magellan, who was the first, at least his crew was the first to go around the earth, okay, to circumnavigate the globe. Magellan didn't make it, he died in the Philippines because his men had a really bad habit of going ashore and stealing and raping and doing terrible things, and Magellan was killed in one of the minor conflicts over there with the Filipino people. He was buried somewhere in the Philippines, we don't know. But his crew managed to make it all the way back to Spain, so of course they celebrated and gave him credit for being the first one to ever go around the world. That of course happens because Christopher Columbus comes along. Okay, so Magellan's after that, as well as a number of other Spanish explorers. But the question is, who is Christopher Columbus? Where do we get him from? Now, the reason I put so many different pictures of him is we don't know what he looked like. We have no clue. Okay, this of course is one of the far one over there is one of the more accepted, versions of it. But he could have looked like that. He could have looked like that. He could have looked like that. We have no clue. We don't know if he had facial hair. We don't know if he had any hair. We don't know anything about him. Of course, there are a number of people that trace his lineage back to Genoa, Italy, but there's no real, it's not like they have a birth certificate on file where Genoa can say, yes, absolutely, he is from here. So again, we're not really sure. In fact, over the summer I was reading a conspiracy theory that actually historians are starting to say has some merit in the fact that Christopher Columbus might have been Jewish, that he might have had Jewish ancestry because his exploration actually left Spain the day before the Spanish Inquisition was supposed to start arresting and detaining Jewish people. And we do know that on the first voyage of Columbus in 1492, that he had crew members who were Jewish. They left the day before, and those Jewish people were left behind when they go over and founded the New World. Now, we do know that Columbus doesn't quite know how he's going to get to the Indies. That's where he's trying to go, is to what is today India. With the goal of getting spices, getting other goods or services that you would normally have had to go through the Middle East to get. That's his goal, is to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, hoping to link up. Okay? They have no clue that there are two continents literally in the way, and no clue that on the other side is the Pacific Ocean. They just think it's one big ocean. So when he runs into land that is not on any map, Columbus isn't stupid. He knows he's found some place that is not on the map. Why does he call them Indians? Well, he calls them that because the crew is pretty stupid. The crew does not know. They're not studying the charts. They just know I unfurl sail, I tie things down, and I go. They're not charting things on a map. Columbus cannot say, I don't know where the heck I am, out of fear of mutiny. Okay? So Columbus, of course, there's a lot of things about him we don't know and we'll never know. Okay? Columbus, again, we don't know what he looks like. We know he takes 4 voyages. He's pretty sure he's found a brand spanking new continent without question, but he personally never sets foot on it. He only goes to the group of islands in the Caribbean like Hispaniola, which is modern day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He goes to Cuba, he does go to Jamaica, he goes to Bermuda. He does go to all those islands, but he never goes and sets foot on Florida or Mexico or any place like that. He never actually sets foot on either of the larger continents that he's given credit for. Okay? Now there are questions abounding as to whether or not he should get credit for the discovery of America. I'll leave that up to you in our discussion next week. We are going to pick up next week on chapter 2, okay? We are going to pick up talking about colonization, and we're going to start talking about how the Spanish and the English as well as some other European countries, decided to colonize the New World. What I would ask you to do is, after enjoying your weekend and coming back and hopefully watching the video to understand exactly what was going on, and looking at the slideshow that I'll also put on there, I need you to read two things, two primary sources. And again, I'll try and put an announcement out there to make it very clear as to what you need to do. You need to read Christopher Columbus's journal. There's a little journal snippet that I would like you to read, as well as a report by Bartolomé de las Casas. Both of those are primary source documents. We're going to talk about them next week. There will be an assignment associated with them. Throughout the week, you need to be getting up to date on Chapter 2. I will post Chapter 2 hopefully Tuesday, so you have some time to read through it. You will have a quiz again on Friday, okay? So you have some assignments next week without question. Most of them are reading, okay? Now the reading assignment again for Columbus and De las Casas will have a writing component associated with it in some way, shape, or form. I'll make that more clear next week. And then, of course, Chapter 2, as usual, you're going to have a quiz. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can always reach out to me through email. And for you remote learners, for the first time, we will have some office hours next week where I will have a Zoom conference call open for you. There will be a link on the website for you to utilize with which to get on and ask questions. As always, you can email me. You can reach out to me through Google Classroom. And I hope everything is clear, hope everything's understandable for you, and I hope you guys are at least understanding kind of what the work ethic is going to be like in AP US History this year. Okay? All right, folks. I will see you this week, hopefully on Zoom calls or in person. Have a nice Labor Day, and enjoy yourselves. Thanks.